Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Nice. That's all I say. Nice, Jim. This is David Eastaugh. This is the C86 show. Always, this is the point where I often say, always bring you the finest in indie pop. But this week it's a special because I spoke, and this was an interview I did a few years ago with the guitarist Steve Howe, who was doing some solo dates around the place. I think this was probably 2 or 3 years ago. So I've got that interview that I thought, well, I should archive just in case anybody was remotely interested. So to do that, I think what we'll do to get the party rolling is to play one of Steve's tracks and then the interview. This is going to be Mood for a Day from the album Fragile. And that's Steve Howe with a track titled Mood for a Day, and that's from the Yes album Fragile. This is David Eastaugh. This is the C86 show. This is a special because this is an interview I did with Steve a few years ago when he was doing some solo dates. This is it, unedited, but all the same, quality chat. I don't know. I enjoyed it. And it was amazing to have an opportunity to interview Steve. This is it. Steve, take it away. So do you want to just start off by just saying what you've got coming up this autumn? Because you've got your solo tour, haven't you? Or you've got a tour coming up.
Well, yeah, I mean, right now we're just doing some rehearsing, and on Friday we start doing the first of about 10 shows with the Steve Howe Trio, and that's Dylan Howe on drums and Ross Stanley on keyboards. He does the organ, actually, and he does the sort of, it's an organ trio, sure, basically, and he does the sort of bass part himself as well, which is quite amazing. So, yeah, we haven't been out for a couple of years. Our album came out, called The Haunted Melody, and then a little bit later we did a live album, but travelling. But, you know, with Yes and then Asia, which I left earlier this year, basically I've been too busy to really get on with this. But this year I made a commitment. You know, I did a solo guitar tour in June, and then this one in September with the trio, and I'm really looking forward to it.
And what will you be playing on this particular show? Because obviously you just mentioned two bands that a lot of people have come across, which is Yes and Asia.
Yeah.
So will you be playing music from that, or just your solo career?
Well, we do twist around a few Yes titles, which we quite like doing. We either just draw parts from them, and so we don't do a full representation. You know, obviously we don't do vocals, basically.
No.
Although I must say, you know, I love singing. But basically, in the trio, we adapt music from a few sources. Some of my solo writing, and then from Yes, and also from some great Jimmy Smith and Kenny Burrell material that was kind of inspiring for us to start the tour. Sure. So yeah, we touch on Yes. We you know, we've done this before, and we usually seem to find a way of pulling a few pieces out.
Yeah, because I noticed a few years ago, Joni Mitchell was going and re-recording, doing some of her early stuff once again, but with different sort of orchestras and different formats and a different style. Right. And she was revisiting, and she said that the music that she had recorded when she was and sort of wrote when she was much younger, it was still relevant, but it was kind of different now that she's in her probably 60s. Do you find the same process, emotional journey, when you go back and revisit some of those Yes songs and you do them again, but in a different style?
Well, I mean, there's two sides to that, really, because Yes are out playing, and when we come here in May and play next year at the Albert Hall and other shows around the UK, we'll actually be sort of transporting people back to 3 albums from Yes, the Yes album, Close to the Edge, and Going for the One, and we play them exactly like the records. I mean, that's our goal, you know, is just, you know, to keep them as close to the record. There's a little bit of changes that we've made over the years, but basically, in the most part, the idea is that. But totally oppositely, when I look at the trio, when we look at Yes material there, we purposely don't attempt that, because it's not the lineup, it's not the personnel, but it's also not the approach. So we just take parts of the Yes music, and usually the instrumental parts, and then we kind of, you know, we invent things on there and we improvise on those ideas. So the ideas are very, very different, but it's very funny that you should mention Joni Mitchell, because we may be actually playing one of her songs in the trio, because Dylan and I and Ross, we really love her music, and she's, you know, strangely become so relevant again, and her music, like she said, you know, it stood the test of time. That's the same with Yes's music, it stood the test of time, and that music, when you do go back, there's two choices. You either do it exactly like the record, record or you reinvent it. And providing you do one of those things well,
Yes.
I don't think a middle road's very good. So if you can get that right, it's a nice balance.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is the Joni Mitchell song that you'll be covering?
Well, I mean, it's not confirmed, but we're going to be rehearsing a tune called Conversations from Ladies of the Canyon.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah,
but I mean, it may not work out, but I hope it does. It most probably will. We'll give it a flow anyway. Give it a try.
Give it a go. But I mean, you must find that a lot of your fans that have been with Yes, probably from the beginning, that music must be so important to them, that it must kind of unleash so much emotional kind of, I don't know, sort of avenues for them. So when you play, those classic kind of riffs and stuff, you must see members of the audience kind of almost having sort of regression therapy. Because
we do. As I said, we'll be doing that in a big way, by doing exactly the albums. And what we find in the trio is they like the fact that we use that material, but obviously not in the same way. So
yes.
there is a relevance to both ideas.
Absolutely. Do you feel, when you do your trio and you sort of go into sort of much smaller venues, do you feel it's a much easier gig, as in not just the gig itself, but the whole sort of event, because the process, because you don't have to deal with so many people and so much kind of baggage, both kind of physical and emotional, that it's a much lighter event. You'll sort of tour this autumn.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of each, really, because, when you play a big venue and you've got the band and the lights and the projection and everything, you're kind of like, you're part of the jigsaw of the show. And obviously in the trio, I'm very much a part of the show. Well, I am in Yes also, but basically there's a different sort of response to that. I've never really been able to make up my mind whether, one is easier or one is harder. I mean,
right.
basically I prepare for them exactly the same way. There's absolutely no difference. A small venue with 100 people and the trio, or 4,000 people somewhere for Yes. I still prepare the same. I still put the same time aside and get ready, and I go on with the 10. Of course, the set's a bit short. Yes and Notorious were playing for hours and hours, which is part of the appeal, I guess. That we overstretch a little bit sometimes. But basically, you've still got to get there on the guitar. You've still got to be comfortable with the role you're playing. But I don't really differentiate much between the shows because like in June when I was doing my solo show, I mean, it was just me, but I still did the same things. And that's a routine that some musicians get into that we like. It's a kind of routine of approach that everything's as valid as everything else. So you can't prioritise and say, because it's a London show, I've got to get much more ready. I've got to be... No, it doesn't matter whether it's Wolverhampton or Woolwich, or London. It just doesn't matter. You're going on in front of people and you've got to play.
Yeah, absolutely. Because one thing that I do love, and obviously on BBC 4 on a Friday night, they always have, kind of seems to have got into a pattern of doing rock shows and rock documentaries, and sort of, looking at certain bands who I just think have got this fantastic story, like Fleetwood Mac or the Eagles. And when I look at Yes, you've got one hell of a history, haven't you? I mean, looking at the different, the time span, but all the different personnels and people come and people gone. And it's still surviving in 2013, coming 14, because obviously looking at your website and what you were saying, you're still doing things, you're still touring, you're still making music, and you're doing a cruise, a cruise ship experience as well, aren't you?
Right, we did one this year. We're doing the same company, but a bigger ship they have. I mean, basically, the Yes thing is a kind of phenomena that, like you say, that it's partly what is around the creation of a band that has a history that keeps playing or is remembered so well, like the band. Those documentaries are pretty interesting stuff. So, we don't revel in it. We just kind of enjoy the fact that it's part of our history, and we're very proud of that, as I am with all, proud of all the members who contributed to Yes over the years. But it just so happens Chris Allen and I forged ahead at 2008 when it looked pretty disastrous for Yes, really. We could have been wiped off the map. But instead, Chris Allen and I kind of pulled out and said, well, okay, we just waited 3 years to tour, and now we've really got to find a way of doing this, Yes. So, over the years, we've developed the lineup up to the point where Jeff Downs has joined on keyboards, and this new singer a year and a half ago joined, called John Davison from California. And he doesn't, these guys are not trying to be the other person.
No,
they're not
absolutely.
pretending they're John or Rick or anything. Basically, what they're doing is finding their feet within a group to contribute and perform these songs that they themselves love very much. So it's it's a well-rounded, reasonably justifiable existence that we team up with people who want to do exactly what we want to do and go out and tour the world. So like you say, the cruise is another thing. When casinos came on the market maybe 15 years ago, not many bands did casinos. Now all bands do casinos in America.
Oh, you're talking about Las Vegas?
Yeah, but not just Las Vegas, but everywhere in America have casinos. You know, Philadelphia's got 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's, Atlantic City. That's almost as big as Vegas. So it became a market, much like cruises are building, and more people are doing cruises than before. So basically, there are these new facets of market. I just done a guitar camp where people came and at a resort in New York State where, I did a performance, I did some workshops. They kind of interacted a bit. So basically, there's different kind of things you can do that spread your wings in the music business, and so you're not just reliant on the all the same facets. You've got new facets to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I came across Yes when I was quite young, and I'm in my late 40s. My brother, who's older, is in his mid 50s, and he was there. He was the absolutely archetypal prog rock fan. He loved not just all the bands, but all the solo albums of them as well. So I sort of became quite, I've got a fantastic knowledge of Yes and Genesis and Wishbone Ash and Barclay James and Focus, etc. And obviously, being a bit younger, I then sort of, progressed a little bit more and sort of explored into the world of punk and indie. I mean, did you ever sort of pick up on those other musical genres that sort of happened during the 70s?
Well, I mean, my life's been full of different musical genres, because my musical taste is incredibly broad. But obviously, when punk first started, or that kind of late 70s era, we didn't really take much notice. I mean, you couldn't really ignore it, but, we obviously didn't get immersive. And yet, Drama, the album we did with Trevor Horn and Jeff Downes at the end of the 70s, actually in 1980, was actually the heaviest and kind of raunchiest album that Yes had made for a very long time. But years later, when I guess, my career with the 80s, lots of different bands coming and going, the 90s, getting back with Yes and doing solo work as well. Basically, when the Libertines came out, and then, the offsprings of that band in particular, became, Pete Doherty and all that. I mean, there was something going on there that I really liked, and that was just the vibrant, youthful approach to being, in rock and roll, being, rock and roll band. So, there are certain kinds of bands like that I just kind of needed,
Sure.
And I got into those Baby Shambles and things like that just because they were raw, they were very edgy, it was very rock and roll. And, but on the other hand, the reason it was like that was they were kind of messing themselves up for quite a bit, and I only hope that they don't do that to the extent that it appeared, as that kind of era slightly faded out. And,
yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, you can't ignore what's going on, and I have an open mind to a lot of it. Obviously, there's parameters where I don't go much, like dance music drives me a bit crazy, but, and there's a whole genre of rap and things that just doesn't really register with me, but I appreciate that it does with other people. And if you're a certain age, if you're more like below the 40 belt, then you most probably really relate to that kind of music. So it has relevance. But for me, I was listening to post Charlie Christian guitarists. I was listening to classical music. I was listening to flamenco and rock and the whole sort of jamboree of different styles. So I've always been open to great music in any field.
Well, look, Steve, thank you ever so much for this interview, and I hopefully will come along to the gig. Yeah, take care, Steve.
Bye, David.
And that was me in conversation with Steve Howe a few years ago. I'm guessing 2017, but who knows? I should check that. Thank you for listening. This has been David Eastaugh, the C86 Show. If you want to contact me, you can on Facebook, Twitter, even Instagram. Check me out with my social media platforms. That's C86 Show. And as I always say, keep it positive and groovy. Otherwise, just don't bother. You should have turned off a long time ago. And yes, and also these shows have been archived, so you can find them on Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, Mixcloud. Just go to C86 Show, which is normally indie pop from the 80s, but sometimes I have delved into other decades and much, much more. But anyway, I'm going to leave you with another track. This is also taken from the Yes album, Fragile, which I loved then and I still do. This is going to be Roundabout. Have a great week.